Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon and watched the strange alien ships approach through the dark space around. Kepler 442b. The moon looked dead and gray, but it was perfect for what they needed today. No atmosphere meant no weather problems, and no life forms meant no one could claim this place belonged to them. Jake had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since the radio signals from deep space told Earth that humans were not alone in the galaxy. Alien ships were beautiful in a way that made Jake feel both amazed and worried. They looked like they were made of crystal and light instead of metal, and they moved through space without any visible engines or exhaust. Each ship was at least twice the size of the horizon, and there were 12 of them arranged in a perfect circle around the landing site. Jake could see energy fields shimmering around each vessel like soap bubbles made of electricity. Lisa Carter stood beside him, checking her translation device for the 100th time. She was Earth's best diplomat and spoke 17 human languages. But today she would need to talk to beings that might not even think the same way humans did. The translation device was based on the mathematical patterns they had found in the alien radio signals, but no one knew if it would actually work when they met face to face. Jake pressed the communication button and spoke slowly into his headset. "This is Captain Morrison of the human vessel Horizon. We are ready to begin the meeting as agreed." The response came through the speakers in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with electronic music. "We acknowledge human vessel. Queen Vexara will meet with your representatives at the prepared location. You may bring 3 of your kind." Jake nodded to Lisa and to Dr. Ben Torres, who was their science officer. The 3 of them put on their spacesuits and took the shuttle down to the moon's surface, where a temporary structure had been built from materials both sides had agreed upon. The building was simple with clear walls and basic life support systems that worked for both humans and the aliens who called themselves Zephyr. INS. Inside the meeting room, Jake got his first look at Queen Vexara and had to work hard not to stare. She was nearly 8 feet tall, and her body seemed to be made of living crystal that changed colors as she moved. Her face was roughly human in shape, but her eyes were solid silver and seemed to look right through him. Most disturbing of all, Jake could feel a strange pressure in his mind whenever he looked directly at her, as if someone was gently pushing against his thoughts. 2 other Zephyrians stood behind their queen, and they were smaller, but just as strange to look at. All 3 aliens wore what looked like flowing robes made of the same crystal material as their bodies, but Jake could not tell where the clothing ended and their skin began. Lisa stepped forward and activated her translation device. "Your Majesty, I am Lisa Carter, representing the human race. We are honored to meet with you and hope this can be the beginning of friendship between our peoples." Queen Vexara tilted her head, and the crystals in her face shifted to show what might have been curiosity. "You speak of friendship, human, but your kind has already shown aggression by refusing to leave our territory when commanded." Jake felt his jaw tighten but stayed quiet. The Zephyrians claimed that 15 star systems belonged to them, including 3 that humans desperately needed for colonies. Earth was running out of room and resources, and those systems had planets that could support human life. Lisa kept her voice calm and diplomatic. "We believe there has been a misunderstanding, Your Majesty. Those systems appear to be uninhabited, and our scans show no signs of Zephyrian settlements or technology. Perhaps we can find a way to share these resources for the benefit of both our species." The Queen's eyes flashed brighter, and the pressure in Jake's mind increased until he felt a mild headache starting. "Share?" Queen Vexara's voice rose in pitch. "You dare suggest that the Zephyrian Empire should share what is ours by right of ancient claim? Your species has existed for mere moments compared to our civilization." Dr. Torres tried to help by pulling out his scanner and showing readings of the disputed systems. "Your Majesty, our instruments detect no current use of these worlds." If your people claimed them long ago, but are not using them now, perhaps we could. He stopped talking when Queen Vexara moved faster than Jake thought possible. One moment. She was standing across the room, and the next she was right in front of Dr. Torres, reaching toward a crystal formation that sat in the center of the meeting table. Jake realized too late that it was some kind of sacred object or important symbol. Lisa also moved quickly, trying to prevent any diplomatic disaster. But in her haste, she accidentally bumped into Dr. Torres, who stumbled forward and put his hand out to catch himself. His gloved fingers touched the crystal for just a fraction of a second, but the effect was immediate and terrible. Queen Vexara let out a sound that was part scream and part electronic shriek. The crystal flared with blinding light, and Jake felt like someone had driven a spike through his brain. The two other Zephyrians moved to flank their queen, and Jake could see energy beginning to build around their hands. Blasphemy! Queen Vexara's voice boomed through the room, and Jake's translation device struggled to keep up. A sacred memory has been defiled by alien touch. This insult cannot be forgiven. Lisa held up her hands in a peaceful gesture. Please. Your Majesty, it was an accident. Dr. Torres meant no disrespect to your sacred object. We did not know. Ignorance is not excuse. The Queen's crystal body blazed with angry red light. You humans are a pestilence that spreads through space, touching and claiming what does not belong to you. You will leave our territory immediately and never return or face the consequences. Jake finally spoke up, knowing that this was the moment that would determine humanity's future in space. With respect, Your Majesty, we cannot simply leave. Earth is dying, and our people need new worlds to survive. We have just as much right to explore this galaxy as anyone else. Queen Vexara turned her silver eyes on Jake, and he felt the full force of her telepathic power pressing against his mind. For a moment, he thought his skull might crack from the pressure, but he gritted his teeth and refused to back down. Right? The Queen's laugh sounded like breaking glass. You speak of rights when you have no power to enforce them. Your primitive ships and crude technology are nothing compared to the might of the Zephyrian Empire. Why won't you just go away? Human? The last words came out as a shout of pure fury that made the walls of the meeting room vibrate. Jake looked directly into those alien eyes and spoke the words that would start a war. Because we're human and we don't give up. 3 months after the disaster on Kepler 442b, Ambassador Ryan Phillips sat in his cabin aboard the heavy cruiser USS Defiance and read through the reports that made his head hurt. 7 human outposts destroyed by Zephyrian energy weapons. 12 exploration ships vaporized when they tried to enter the disputed star systems. Over 300 human lives lost, and Queen Vexara seemed to think this would make humanity give up and go home. She was wrong about humans. Ryan had been studying every piece of information they could gather about the Zephyrian Empire for the past 3 months, and what he found both impressed and worried him. The Zephyrians had ruled over 47 different star systems for over 2,000 years and controlled more than 30 alien species. Their technology was so advanced that most of these species had simply surrendered without fighting when the Zephyrians first arrived at their worlds. What puzzled Ryan was that none of these conquered species seemed unhappy about being ruled by the Zephyrians. The reports from captured Zephyrian databases showed that Queen Vexara provided protection and resources to her subjects in exchange for their loyalty and obedience. It was not a cruel empire, but it was absolute in its authority. Captain Danny Rodriguez knocked on Ryan's cabin door and entered without waiting for permission. Danny commanded the USS Defiance and had volunteered for this mission, even though everyone knew it was probably suicide. The Zephyrians had made it clear that any human ships entering their territory would be destroyed on sight. We're approaching the border of Zephyrian Space Ambassador. Long-range sensors are picking up at least 20 of their ships waiting for U.S. Ryan closed his reports and stood up. He was 52 years old and had spent most of his career negotiating with difficult world leaders, but he had never faced anything like Queen Vexara. The woman could read minds and had weapons that could turn a starship into glowing particles in seconds. "Any response to our communication requests, Captain?" Danny shook his head. "Nothing but automated warnings telling us to turn around or be destroyed." "I'm starting to think they really don't want to talk to us." Ryan almost smiled at the understatement. "They'll talk to us, Captain. The Queen is curious about humans, even if she won't admit it. She could have simply exterminated our entire species by now, but she keeps giving us warnings and chances to surrender. That tells me she wants to understand why we won't submit like all the others." The bridge of the USS Defiance was larger than the one on Jake Morrison's exploration ship, but it felt crowded when Ryan and Danny arrived. 20 crew members worked at various stations monitoring sensors and weapons while they approached what might be their deaths. Ryan noticed that none of them seemed particularly worried about the overwhelming odds they faced. Lieutenant Katie Walsh looked up from her engineering station and grinned at Ryan. She was 26 years old and had volunteered to come on this mission because she found alien technology fascinating. The fact that the aliens might kill her for studying it did not seem to bother her at all. "Ambassador, I've been analyzing the energy signatures from those Zephyrian ships, and I think I know how their shields work. If we can get close enough, I might be able to find a weakness." Before Ryan could respond, the main screen flashed, and Queen Vexara appeared in all her terrible beauty. Her crystal body glowed with angry red light, and her silver eyes seemed to stare directly at each person on the bridge. "Human vessel, you have been warned to leave Zephyrian territory. This is your final opportunity to turn around and flee before I demonstrate the price of your stubbornness." Ryan stepped forward and tried to project confidence he did not feel. "Your Majesty, I am Ambassador Phillips, and I have been authorized by the government of Earth to negotiate a peaceful solution to our dispute. Surely we can find some way to coexist in this vast galaxy." Queen Vexara's laugh sounded like breaking crystal mixed with electronic feedback. "Coexist? You speak as if we are equals human, but your entire species could be eliminated with a single command from me. I have studied your history and your psychology. You are a violent primitive race that destroys everything it touches, including your own world." Danny Rodriguez stepped up beside Ryan and crossed his arms. The captain was not a diplomat, but he understood when someone was trying to bully him. "Your Majesty, with respect, we didn't destroy Earth. We're trying to save it by finding new worlds for our people. And we might be primitive compared to you, but we're not violent without reason." The Queen tilted her crystal head and stared at Danny with those unsettling silver eyes. "Not violent? Your history shows constant warfare between your own tribes. You have weapons designed to kill millions, and you use them against each other. How can I trust such a species with access to the galaxy?" Ryan felt the conversation slipping away from diplomacy toward confrontation, but he also sensed something else in the Queen's words. She was not just angry about human trespassing. She was genuinely confused about why humans acted the way they did. "Your Majesty, may I ask how many wars the Zephyrian Empire has fought in the last 1,000 years? Queen Vexara's glow shifted from red to orange, which Ryan hoped meant surprise rather than increased anger. "Wars? We do not fight wars, human. When we encounter a new species, we demonstrate our power, and they submit. There is no need for prolonged conflict when the outcome is obvious." Lieutenant Walsh suddenly spoke up from her station. "But what if the outcome isn't obvious? What if someone refuses to submit?" The Queen's attention turned to Katie, and Ryan felt his heart rate increase. Queen Vexara could kill the young engineer with a thought, but Katie seemed completely unafraid as she waited for an answer. That has never happened before, Lieutenant Walsh. Every species we have encountered has recognized our superiority and accepted our protection, except for humans. Danny Rodriguez laughed, and the sound seemed to surprise everyone on the bridge, including himself. Well, Your Majesty, that's probably because you never met anyone stupid enough to think they could win. Against impossible odds. Queen Vexara stared at Danny for a long moment, and Ryan could feel the psychic pressure building in the air around them. Then something unexpected happened. The Queen's crystal features shifted into what might have been puzzlement. You believe you can defeat the Zephyrian Empire, Captain Rodriguez? Danny shrugged. Honestly? Probably not. You've got better ships, better weapons, and you can raid our mines. But here's the thing, Your Majesty. Even if we can't win, that doesn't mean we're going to give up. Sometimes humans fight just because it's the right thing to do. The connection suddenly cut off, and the screen went back to showing the approaching Zephyrian fleet. Ryan looked around the bridge at his crew and saw the same expression on every face. They were scared, but they were not backing down. All stations. Prepare for battle, Danny ordered. Katie, I want you monitoring their shield frequencies constantly. If you see any weakness, let me know immediately. Ryan sat down in the observer's chair and strapped himself in. In a few minutes, they would either be dead or prisoners, but at least Queen Vexara would learn something about human nature. They might not be able to win, but they were too stubborn to quit. The first Zephyrian energy beam struck the USS Defiance 30 seconds later, and Katie Walsh started laughing as the ship's shields flared and held. Captain, I was right about their shield frequency. Our defensive grid is actually blocking some of their attacks. Danny grinned and ordered the ship forward into the swarm of alien vessels. 20 Zephyrian ships against one human cruiser should have been a massacre, but the USS Defiance kept fighting, and Ryan began to understand why Queen Vexara found humans so confusing. They really were too stupid to know when they were beaten. Queen Vexara stood in her private chambers aboard the flagship, Eternal Glory, and tried to understand what she had witnessed during the battle with the human vessel USS Defiance. The ship should have been destroyed in the first exchange of fire, but somehow it had survived for nearly 20 minutes against her entire fleet. Even more disturbing was the fact that the humans had managed to damage 3 of her ships before finally being disabled and boarded. The Queen's crystalline body pulsed with colors that shifted from blue to purple as she accessed the memories of the battle through her telepathic connection to her crew. She could see through their eyes and feel their thoughts as they had fought the stubborn human vessel. What she found in those shared memories made no sense to her. The humans had known they were going to lose from the beginning. Their own sensor readings showed them exactly how outmatched they were. And yet they had fought with a desperation and creativity that her forces were not prepared for. Captain Rodriguez had used his ship's inferior speed and maneuverability in ways that violated standard tactical doctrine, but somehow worked against Zephyrian formations that had never been challenged before. Even more puzzling was what happened when her boarding parties finally breached the human ship. Instead of surrendering as any rational species, the humans had continued to resist even after their weapons were destroyed. Lieutenant Walsh had actually tried to overload the ship's reactor to prevent capture and had only been stopped when Queen Vexara herself intervened telepathically. Now Katie Walsh sat in a cell aboard the Eternal Glory, and the Queen found herself visiting the human prisoner more often than she cared to admit. The young engineer was unlike any being Vexara had encountered in 2,000 years of rule. She could not read Katie's thoughts completely due to some natural human resistance to telepathy, and the partial mental contact she did achieve revealed a mind that worked in ways that fascinated her. Why did you attempt to destroy your own ship? Lieutenant Walsh? Queen Vexara asked as she materialized in the holding cell. Her crystal form glowed with soft blue light that she hoped would seem less threatening to the human. Katie looked up from the technical manual she had been reading and smiled. The Queen had provided her with Zephyrian technical documentation, partly as a test and partly because she was curious to see how the human mind would react to advanced alien science. Katie had absorbed the information with an enthusiasm that both impressed and worried Vexara. Because if I couldn't stop you from capturing our ship at least, I could make sure you didn't get any useful information from it, Your Majesty. Captain Rodriguez and Ambassador Phillips were good people, and I didn't want their sacrifice to be meaningless. Queen Vexara settled into a seated position that brought her closer to Katie's eye level. The human showed no fear of her telepathic abilities or her obvious physical superiority, which was another trait that puzzled the Queen. Every other species had shown immediate submission when confronted with Zephyrian power. You would have died in the explosion, Lieutenant. Does your life mean so little to you? Katie shrugged and turned a page in the manual. It's not that my life doesn't matter, Your Majesty. It's just that some things are more important than staying alive, like protecting your friends or standing up for what's right, even when you know you're going to lose. The Queen tried to probe deeper into Katie's mind, but hit the same strange resistance she encountered with all humans. It was not a deliberate mental shield, but rather some quirk of human brain structure that made their thoughts partially opaque, even to her advanced telepathic abilities. I have ruled over 30 species for 2 millennia, Lieutenant Walsh, and none of them have ever displayed such irrational behavior. Why do humans value abstract concepts like friendship and justice more than survival? Katie looked up from her reading and studied Queen Vexara with clear green eyes that showed more curiosity than fear. Maybe because survival isn't really living, Your Majesty. I mean, what's the point of staying alive if you have to give up everything that makes you who you are? Before the Queen could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Her telepathic connection to the bridge crew immediately showed her what was happening, and she felt something she had not experienced in centuries. Surprise mixed with what might have been admiration. Another human fleet had arrived in the system and was approaching her position. Not just 1 or 2 ships like before, but over 50 vessels of various sizes, all broadcasting the same message. Commander Alex Turner of the human military was demanding the immediate release of all prisoners and threatening to attack if his demands were not met. Queen Vexara rose to her full height and prepared to leave the cell, but Katie's voice stopped her. Your Majesty, I know you could destroy that fleet easily, but before you do that, could I ask you something? The Queen paused and looked back at the young human, who had somehow become the most interesting conversation partner she had found in decades. What is your question, Lieutenant? Katie stood up and faced the towering alien ruler without showing any of the deference that other species automatically displayed. Have you ever wondered why your empire stopped growing, Your Majesty? I've been reading your history files, and you haven't encountered a new species or expanded into new territory for over 300 years. Don't you find that strange? The question hit Queen Vexara like a physical blow. She had not thought about the Empire's expansion in those terms before, but Katie was right. The Zephyrian Empire had reached its current size centuries ago, and had remained static ever since. Her military commanders had attributed this to having conquered all the worthwhile territory in this part of the galaxy. But now she wondered if there was another explanation. What are you suggesting, Lieutenant Walsh? Katie smiled and held up the technical manual she had been reading. Your technology is amazing, Your Majesty, but it's all based on principles that are thousands of years old. You've perfected everything, but you haven't really innovated. When was the last time a Zephyrian invented something completely new? Queen Vexara felt her crystal body pulse with colors she had not displayed in centuries, as she struggled with concepts that challenged everything she believed about her civilization. Katie's words suggested that the Zephyrian Empire's greatest strength might also be its greatest weakness. You believe our perfection has made us stagnant? I think maybe when you're so much more powerful than everyone else you stop learning. From them, your majesty. My species might be primitive compared to yours, but we're always trying new things because we have to. We don't have the luxury of being perfect. The alarms continued to sound, and Queen Vixara knew she had to deal with the approaching human fleet, but Katie's words had planted seeds of doubt that would not be easily dismissed. For 2,000 years, she had ruled an empire based on the absolute superiority of Zephyrian civilization, but now a young human engineer was suggesting that superiority itself might be a trap. I must attend to your rescue fleet, Lieutenant Walsh. But we will continue this conversation later. Katie nodded and sat back down with her manual. I'll be here, Your Majesty. Oh, and you might want to be careful with Commander Turner. He's probably really angry about you capturing us, and angry humans can be pretty unpredictable. Queen Vixara left the cell with her mind spinning with new questions and uncomfortable possibilities. She had thought she understood the nature of power and civilization, but Katie Walsh had just suggested that everything she believed might be wrong as she made her way to the bridge to deal with yet another group of stubborn humans. The Queen found herself looking forward to the challenge in a way that surprised her. For the first time in centuries, she was not bored. Lieutenant Colonel Gary Stevens crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a Zephyrian transport ship and watched his team prepare for the next phase of their mission. 6 months of guerrilla warfare against the Zephyrian Empire had taught humanity valuable lessons about fighting an enemy with superior technology. The key was not to engage them directly where their advantages were overwhelming, but to strike fast and disappear before they could coordinate a proper response. Gary's team consisted of 12 human soldiers who had volunteered for what everyone called suicide missions. They used captured Zephyrian equipment when possible and improvised weapons when necessary, but their greatest asset was something the aliens could not replicate. Humans were naturally resistant to telepathic coordination, which meant Zephyrian forces had trouble predicting their movements. Stevens, "We're picking up movement from the research facility," whispered Sergeant Linda Parker through his headset. She was positioned on a ridge overlooking their target with a captured Zephyrian scanner that Dr. Maria Lopez had modified to work with human technology. "How many contacts, Linda?" 20, maybe 25, but they're not moving in standard formation. Looks like they're confused about something." Gary smiled grimly and signaled his team to move forward. Dr. Lopez had been working for months to develop jamming technology that could disrupt Zephyrian telepathic communication, and today was the first field test. If it worked the way she hoped, it would level the playing field significantly. The research facility was a crystalline structure that rose from the surface of the dead moon like a frozen wave. Intelligence reports suggested it contained important data about Zephyrian military capabilities and possibly information about other species in their empire. Gary's mission was to get inside, download everything they could, and get out before reinforcements arrived. Private Tony Clark appeared beside Gary with the stealth equipment that made this kind of mission possible. Human engineers had reverse engineered Zephyrian cloaking technology and improved it by adding unpredictable movement patterns that took advantage of human reflexes. The result was not perfect invisibility, but it was good enough to fool alien sensors that expected logical behavior. "Colonel, the jamming field is working," Tony reported. "I can see Zephyrian guards trying to communicate with each other, but they keep stopping and looking confused." Gary activated his own cloaking device and felt the familiar tingle as the energy field wrapped around his body. The technology still amazed him even after months of use. 6 months ago, Humanity had been hopelessly outmatched by Zephyrian forces, but captured equipment and human ingenuity were rapidly changing the balance of power. The infiltration went smoothly until they reached the central data core. Gary expected heavy security, but instead found only 3 Zephyrian technicians who seemed to be arguing about something. He could not understand their crystalline language, but their body language suggested frustration and confusion. "Colonel, take a look at this," called Private Janet Murphy from a computer terminal. She had been trained to interface with alien technology, and her expertise had proven invaluable during these raids. "This isn't just a research facility. It's some kind of command center for their entire military operation in this sector." Gary moved to look over Janet's shoulder at the scrolling Zephyrian text that their translation software was slowly converting to English. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Zephyrian Empire was not as powerful as they pretended to be. "Janet, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" She nodded grimly as more data flowed across the screen. "Colonel, according to these files, the Zephyrian Empire has been in decline for over 300 years. Their population is decreasing, their technology development has stagnated, and several subject species are beginning to question their authority." Gary felt a mix of excitement and worry as he realized the implications. If the Zephyrian Empire was weaker than it appeared, that might explain why they had not simply exterminated humanity, despite their obvious technological advantages. Queen Vexara might actually need the resources and territory she was fighting to keep from humans. "Download everything, Janet. Command needs to see this immediately." The extraction went as smoothly as the infiltration until they were almost back to their pickup point. Gary was beginning to think they might actually complete the mission without casualties when Sergeant Parker's voice crackled through his headset with an urgency that made his stomach drop. "Stevens, we've got company. Big company. I count at least 40 Zephyrian ships dropping out of hyperspace, and they look angry." Gary looked up at the stars and saw the familiar crystalline gleam of Zephyrian vessels spreading across the sky like a deadly constellation. Queen Vexara had apparently decided that enough was enough and was bringing significant firepower to deal with the human raiders once and for all. "All units, this is Stevens. Execute emergency extraction protocol immediately. We've got what we came for, and staying here any longer would be suicide." The team scattered toward their individual escape routes as planned, but Gary knew that some of them probably would not make it home. Zephyrian ships were already beginning orbital bombardment of the moon's surface, and the energy beams were powerful enough to vaporize anything they hit directly. Gary was halfway to his extraction point when he saw Private Clark stumble and fall. The young soldier had taken a glancing hit from falling debris and was struggling to get back to his feet. Gary did not hesitate. He turned back and grabbed Clark under the arms, dragging him toward the shelter of a rocky outcropping. "Leave me, Colonel," Clark gasped. "You need to get that data back to command." Gary looked down at the wounded soldier and thought about what Katie Walsh had said during her interrogation reports. Some things were more important than survival, and protecting your people was one of them. "Not happening, Tony. We go home together or we don't go home at all." The rescue ship arrived just as Zephyrian ground forces began landing on the moon's surface. Gary and Clark made it to the pickup point along with 8 other members of the team, but 4 soldiers did not return. Gary felt the familiar mix of relief and guilt that came with surviving a mission that cost other people their lives. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Gary reviewed the data they had captured and began to understand why Queen Vexara seemed so determined to defeat humanity. The Zephyrian Empire was not the invincible force it appeared to be, and humans represented something that threatened the foundation of her power. They were proof that the Empire could be challenged. Back on the moon, Queen Vexara stood among the wreckage of her research facility and tried to process what had happened. The humans had not just raided her installation, they had done it with a level of coordination and effectiveness that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. Worse yet, her telepathic. Scouts reported that similar raids were happening throughout Zephyrian territory. Humans were learning to use captured technology faster than her engineers could develop countermeasures, and their natural resistance to mental coordination made them incredibly difficult to predict or track. 4. The first time in her long reign, Queen Vexara began to wonder if she might actually lose this war.